There are people whose kindness is a weapon they've never learned to put down, whose generosity is a shield against their own worthlessness, whose smile is a performance so convincing they've forgotten what their real face looks like underneath. Introduction. Picture this: a person who always says yes, who shows up for everyone, who remembers birthdays, sends thoughtful messages, offers help before it's asked for, who makes themselves available at all hours, who gives and gives and gives until there's nothing left. From the outside, they look like a saint, the kindest person you know, the one everyone loves, the friend who never lets you down. But if you look closer, if you really look, you'll see something else. You'll see the exhaustion behind their smile, the resentment simmering beneath their generosity, the quiet rage of someone who has spent their entire life taking care of others, while their own needs die of neglect. You'll see someone who doesn't know how to be kind to themselves, someone who has weaponized their goodness, someone who is slowly disappearing beneath the weight of everyone else's needs. This is the dark side of kindness, not the kindness that flows naturally from a full cup, not the generosity that comes from genuine care and healthy boundaries, not the compassion that includes oneself. This is the kindness born from fear, from unworthiness, from the desperate, unspoken belief that if you stop giving, you'll stop mattering, that your value is measured by your usefulness, that love is something you have to earn through perpetual self-sacrifice. This is kindness as survival strategy. And it's killing the people who practice it. Part 1. The architecture of false kindness. Let me show you what this looks like up close. It's the person who cannot say no. Not because they don't want to, but because the word feels physically impossible to form. Because saying no would make them selfish, bad, wrong, unworthy of the love they're desperately trying to secure through their yes. So they say yes to everything. Yes to plans they don't want to make. Yes to favors that drain them. Yes to relationships that take but never give. Yes to responsibilities that aren't theirs. Yes to other people's emergencies while their own life falls apart in the background. And with each yes, they die a little more. It's the person who overfunctions in every relationship, who takes on the emotional labor of everyone around them, who becomes the therapist, the problem solver, the fixer, the mediator, the caretaker. They listen to everyone's problems for hours, but never share their own. They remember every detail of your struggles but deflect when you ask about theirs. They show up for your crisis at 2 a.m. but would never dare call you at 2 p.m. Not because you wouldn't be there for them, but because they've convinced themselves that needing help makes them weak, that having problems makes them a burden, that their job in every relationship is to give, and asking to receive would violate some unspoken contract. So they carry everything alone, and they call it strength. But it's not strength. It's fear disguised as virtue. It's the person who apologizes for existing, who thanks you profusely for things that require no thanks, who treats basic kindness from others like an extraordinary gift they don't deserve. Thank you so much for texting me back. I'm so sorry to bother you with this. You're amazing for doing this for me, after you did the bare minimum. They're so grateful for scraps of attention because they genuinely believe scraps are all they deserve. They've set the bar for how they should be treated so low it's underground. And they call this humility. But it's not humility. It's self-abandonment dressed up as grace. Part 2. The origins. Where kindness becomes a cage. So how does this happen? How does kindness, something that should be beautiful, become toxic? It starts in childhood. It almost always starts in childhood. Maybe you grew up in a home where love was conditional, where affection had to be earned through good behavior, perfect grades, flawless compliance, where your parents' attention was a resource distributed based on how little trouble you caused, how helpful you were, how much you could anticipate and meet their needs. You learned quickly, good children get love. Children who need things get rejected. So you became good. So good. You became helpful, obedient, easy. You learned to read the room, to manage other people's emotions, to make yourself useful. You learned that your worth was directly proportional to what you could do for others. And it worked. You got praise. You're such a good kid. I never have to worry about you. What would I do without you? The praise felt like love. So you kept performing, and the performance became your identity. Or maybe you grew up with a parent who was depressed, sick, addicted, overwhelmed. A parent who needed you to be the parent, who needed you to be strong while they fell apart, who needed you to manage the household, care for siblings, hold the family together with your small, inadequate hands. You became the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who could handle it, and everyone praised your maturity, your strength, your kindness. No one noticed that you were a child carrying adult burdens. No one saw that your kindness was actually survival, that you were being good because the alternative, falling apart yourself, wasn't an option when someone had to keep the world from ending. So you learned, your needs don't matter. Other people's needs come first. Your job is to hold it together. And you've been holding it together ever since. For decades. Exhausted, resentful, alone. Or maybe your kindness was born from rejection, from being bullied, excluded, made to feel different or wrong or too much. You learned that being kind, being useful, being giving, being endlessly accommodating was how you earned acceptance. If you were nice enough, maybe they'd like you. If you helped enough, maybe they'd include you. If you gave enough, maybe they'd stay. Your kindness became a peace offering, a way to apologize for existing, a transaction. I will give you everything I have, and in return, please don't leave me. And sometimes it worked. People did like you. They kept you around. But they liked you for what you gave them, not for who you were. And deep down, you knew it. You knew your relationships were built on what you provided, not on your inherent worth. So you could never stop giving. Never stop performing. Never stop being kind. Because if you stopped, they'd see the real you. And the real you, the one with needs, with limits, with the audacity to sometimes say no, that version wasn't lovable. Or so you believed. Part 3. The psychology, the mechanisms of self-destruction. Let's talk about what's really happening in the psychology of the person who practices toxic kindness. On the surface, they look selfless, noble, compassionate. But beneath the surface, there's a complex web of fear, shame, and unmet needs driving the behavior. Fear of abandonment. At the core, the compulsively kind person is terrified of being left. They've internalized the belief, often from childhood, that they're not enough. That if people really knew them, they'd leave. That their value lies entirely in what they can do for others. So they make themselves indispensable. They become the person everyone needs. They solve your problems, remember your preferences, show up for you unconditionally. Not because they're genuinely overflowing with generosity, but because they're desperately trying to make themselves too valuable to lose. It's kindness as insurance policy, as preemptive strike against rejection, inability to tolerate conflict. People pleasers and compulsive caregivers often have an extreme aversion to conflict. Any disagreement, any tension, any possibility of disappointing someone feels catastrophic. So they avoid it at all costs. They say yes when they mean no. They suppress their needs to keep the peace. They twist themselves into pretzels to avoid upsetting anyone. Why? Often because conflict in childhood was dangerous. Either it led to withdrawal of love, or it escalated into chaos, or it confirmed that you were bad and wrong. So you learned conflict, rejection, agreement, safety. You learned to sacrifice your truth to maintain harmony. You learned that your discomfort was a small price to pay for avoiding the terror of disapproval. And now, as an adult, you've become someone who would rather betray yourself than risk a difficult conversation. Vicarious living. Here's something most people don't realize about toxic kindness. It's often a way of living through others when you don't know how to live for yourself. When you don't have a clear sense of who you are, what you want, what you need. When your own inner world feels empty or terrifying, focusing on other people's lives becomes a convenient escape. You become obsessed with helping them, fixing them, supporting them. You invest enormous energy in their problems, their goals, their happiness. Why? Because it's easier than facing the void inside yourself. It's easier than confronting your own unmet needs, your own dreams you've abandoned, your own life you're not living. Focusing on others is a socially acceptable form of self-abandonment, and everyone praises you for it, which confirms that this is where your value lies. Not in being yourself, but in being of use to others. The Messiah complex. Some people who practice toxic kindness develop what psychologists call a Messiah or Savior complex. They need to rescue people. They're drawn to broken people, to projects, to relationships where they can be the hero. Why? Because being needed feels like being loved. Because fixing others makes them feel valuable in a way they've never felt valuable just for existing. Because the role of savior gives them a clear identity and purpose when they don't have one of their own. But here's the dark truth. They don't actually want the people they're helping to get better. Not really. Because if the broken person heals, if the crisis resolves, if the person becomes independent, what role does the savior play then? Their entire identity is built on being needed. So unconsciously, they keep themselves in relationships and situations where they can continue to rescue, to fix, to save. It's not really kindness. It's codependency wearing a halo. Part 4. The cost, what toxic kindness destroys. Let's talk about what happens to a person who lives like this, who gives and never takes. Who says yes when they mean no, who abandons themselves for others. They lose themselves. Slowly, over years or decades, they disappear. They stop knowing what they like because they've spent so long accommodating others' preferences. They stop knowing what they want because they've spent so long asking everyone else. They stop knowing who they are because they've spent so long being whoever others needed them to be. They become a chameleon, a mirror, a blank slate onto which others project their needs. And when they're finally alone, when there's no one to care for, no one to please, They feel empty, hollow, like there's nothing there, because there isn't. They've given it all away. They build resentment. This is the inevitable outcome of perpetual self-sacrifice, rage. At first, they don't feel it. They're too busy being kind. Too invested in their identity as the selfless one. But the resentment builds, quietly, in the background. They resent the people they're helping. They resent that no one reciprocates with the same intensity. They resent that they're always the one who has to be strong, who has to give, who has to carry everyone. They resent that others don't appreciate them enough, don't recognize their sacrifice, don't realize how much they do, but they can't express the resentment, because that would make them bad, selfish, not the kind person they've worked so hard to be. So they swallow it. They smile. They keep giving. And the resentment festers, turns inward, becomes depression, self-hatred, a feeling of being trapped in a life they never wanted but can't escape. They attract takers. Here's something nobody tells you about being excessively kind. You don't attract reciprocal, healthy relationships. You attract users. People who are emotionally healthy and balanced won't take advantage of your boundless generosity. They'll notice you're overgiving and they'll push back. They'll say, "Hey, you don't have to do all this for me. Let me do something for you." But people who are selfish, narcissistic, or simply opportunistic, they'll take everything you offer and ask for more, because you've taught them, through your actions, that your job is to give and theirs is to receive. You've set a pattern where your needs don't matter and theirs are paramount. And then you wonder why all your relationships are one-sided, why you're surrounded by people who take, but never give, why you feel used. It's because your toxic kindness is a magnet for exactly the wrong people. They burn out. Eventually the body keeps the score. You can only run on empty for so long before you crash. You can only ignore your needs, suppress your emotions, exhaust yourself for others before something breaks. For some, it's physical illness, autoimmune disorders, chronic fatigue, migraines. The body finally forces you to stop through pain or incapacity. For others, it's mental health crisis, severe depression, anxiety so crippling you can't function, breakdown that looks like coming apart at the seams. For others, it's addiction, to alcohol, to work, to relationships, to anything that numbs the pain of self-abandonment. The person who was always there for everyone suddenly can't even be there for themselves. And the cruelest part? Often, the people they've spent years caring for don't know how to care back. Because the relationship was never balanced. It was always, you give, they take. So when you finally need help, many of them disappear. Or they're uncomfortable. Or they offer shallow support and then return to their lives. And you're left alone, realizing the truth. Your kindness didn't earn you love. It earned you a role. And when you can't play that role anymore, you're no longer useful. Part 5. The Reckoning. When the mask cracks. There often comes a moment when the compulsively kind person can't do it anymore. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. A soft collapse rather than an explosion. Maybe it's after years of giving and getting nothing back, they finally say no to something. And the person, shocked, because you've never said no before, reacts badly, gets angry, calls you selfish, and something inside you breaks. Because you realize, all this time, they didn't love me. They loved what I did for them. Or maybe it's a health crisis that forces you to stop. You literally can't keep giving because your body won't let you. And as you rest, as you're forced into stillness, you start to feel things you've been running from for years. Grief, anger, the enormous weight of unmet needs you've been carrying alone. And you realize, I've spent my whole life taking care of everyone but myself. And now I'm broken. And no one knows how to take care of me because I never let them see I needed it. Or maybe it's therapy. A good therapist who finally asks you, when's the last time you did something for yourself? When's the last time you said what you really needed? Why do you believe your needs matter less than everyone else's? And you can't answer, because you've never questioned it. You've always assumed this is just who you are. The giver, the kind one, the strong one. And the therapist gently suggests, what if this isn't strength? What if it's a trauma response? What if you're not actually kind, you're just afraid? And something cracks open inside you. Part 6. The patterns in relationships. Let's look at how toxic kindness manifests in romantic relationships specifically. The compulsively kind person doesn't date equals. They date people they can save. People who need them. They're attracted to the emotionally unavailable, the wounded, the struggling. Not because they're masochistic, but because these relationships have a clear dynamic. You help, they need. You know your role. You know your value. You're the fixer, the supporter, the one who stays when everyone else leaves. And it feels like love. This intensity, this being needed so desperately. But it's not love. It's codependency. They overfunction while their partner underfunctions. They do the emotional labor of two people. They make all the effort, all the compromises, all the sacrifices, and they tell themselves, I'm just more capable. I'm just stronger. I'm just more giving. But the truth is darker. They're recreating a childhood pattern where their worth was tied to how much they could handle, where love was earned through service, where their needs didn't matter but everyone else's did. So they choose partners who confirm this worldview. Partners who take but don't give. Partners who need but don't nurture. And when the relationship inevitably becomes exhausting and one-sided, they don't leave. They just give more. Try harder. Bend further. Because leaving would mean admitting they failed. And they can't fail at being kind. It's all they have. Part 7. The shadow side. The hidden cruelty. Here's what's really dark about toxic kindness. It's not actually kind. Beneath the generous surface, there's often manipulation, control, martyrdom. The person who gives excessively often keeps score. They remember every favor, every sacrifice, every time they showed up. And even if they never say it out loud, they expect reciprocation. They expect gratitude. They expect you to acknowledge how much they do. And when you don't, when you take their kindness for granted, which they've trained you to do, they feel victimized. After everything I've done for you, that phrase, that weapon, the martyr's lament, they use their kindness as leverage, as proof of your debt to them, as reason you should comply with what they want. It's not generosity if you're keeping score. It's a transaction, and there's cruelty in it too. Toward themselves, yes, but also toward others. Because when you refuse to express your needs, when you won't be honest about your limits, when you say yes while radiating resentment, you deny others the chance to truly know you. You deny them the opportunity to care for you, to give back, to be in a real relationship. You martyr yourself and then resent them for not reading your mind. for not seeing that you're struggling, for not spontaneously offering the help you refuse to ask for. You make yourself the victim of your own choices and then blame others for the consequences. That's not kindness. That's passive-aggressive self-destruction. There's also the arrogance in it. The assumption that you know what everyone needs, that you're the only one capable of helping, that others can't handle their own lives without your intervention. You insert yourself into situations uninvited. You give advice that wasn't asked for. You help in ways that actually undermine others' autonomy and growth. Because if they learn to help themselves, they won't need you anymore. And you need to be needed. So your kindness keeps people dependent, keeps them small, keeps them in the role of project rather than equal. That's not compassion. That's control. Part 8. The cultural dimension. We need to talk about how society reinforces toxic kindness, especially in certain groups. For women, toxic kindness is often rewarded and expected. Women are natural caregivers. A good woman puts her family first. Real women are selfless. Girls are socialized from childhood to be accommodating, to prioritize others' feelings, to make themselves small and palatable, to be the emotional labor force of relationships and families. So when a woman becomes a compulsive people pleaser who abandons herself for others, society applauds her. What a devoted mother. Such a supportive wife. She has a heart of gold. No one notices she's dying inside. Certain cultures heavily emphasize duty, filial piety, collective good over individual needs. In these contexts, expressing your own needs can be seen as selfish, disrespectful, shameful. So people learn to suppress themselves, to serve, to sacrifice, and it's called virtue, honor, love. But the psychological cost is enormous. The resentment, the loss of self, the inability to ever truly be known, these things don't disappear just because culture says they should. The wound is still there. It just can't be acknowledged. Part 9. The awakening. Seeing the truth. So what happens when the compulsively kind person finally sees what they've been doing? First, there's grief. Grief for all the years spent performing instead of being. For all the relationships built on false pretenses. For the person they might have been if they'd felt safe enough to be themselves. There's anger too. At the people who took advantage. At the systems that rewarded self-abandonment. At themselves for participating in their own erasure. And there's fear. Enormous, paralyzing fear. Because if you stop being kind, if you start setting boundaries, saying no, prioritizing yourself, who will you be? Your entire identity is built on being the giver, on being needed, on being good. If you're not that person anymore, what's left? This is the existential crisis of the people pleaser. The terror of discovering that beneath the performance, they don't know who they are. But sometimes, from that fear and grief and anger, something new emerges. A question. What if I mattered? Not because of what I do for others, but just because I'm human. What if my needs were just as valid as everyone else's? And that question, terrifying as it is, becomes the beginning of transformation. Part 10. The healing. Learning true kindness. Healing from toxic kindness doesn't mean becoming selfish. It doesn't mean never helping anyone or rejecting compassion. It means learning the difference between kindness that flows from wholeness and kindness that flows from fear. True kindness comes from a full cup. You give because you have abundance to share, not because you're trying to earn your right to exist. True kindness includes yourself. You extend the same compassion to your own needs that you extend to others. True kindness has boundaries. You help when you genuinely have capacity, not out of obligation or fear of rejection. Learning to say no. This is the first and hardest step. Actually saying the word no, not "I don't think I can," or "maybe," or "let me check." Just no. It will feel like the worst thing you've ever done. Your nervous system will scream that you're being selfish, that they'll hate you, that you're violating some fundamental law. But you do it anyway. And you survive. And slowly you learn. Saying no doesn't destroy relationships. It reveals which relationships were real and which were transactional. The people who genuinely care about you will respect your boundaries. The people who were using you will disappear. And that loss, painful as it is actually a gift. Because now you know who was really there for you. Identifying your needs. After years of ignoring your own needs, you might not even know what they are. So you have to learn to listen to yourself again. What do you actually want? Not what you think you should want, not what would make others happy, but what would genuinely nourish you. What makes you feel alive? What drains you? What do you need to feel safe, seen, valued? These aren't selfish questions. They're human questions, and you deserve to answer them. Practicing reciprocity. You have to learn to receive, to ask for help, to let others see your struggles. This will feel vulnerable, exposing, wrong, but it's actually the path to real intimacy. Because relationships built on one person giving and one person taking aren't relationships. They're performances. Real connection requires mutual vulnerability, mutual giving and receiving, the willingness to be both strong and weak, both helper and helped. Reparenting yourself. Much of toxic kindness is rooted in not receiving adequate care in childhood. So now, as an adult, you have to give yourself what you didn't get. You have to become the compassionate parent to your own inner child. The one who says, "Your needs matter. You don't have to earn love. You're enough just as you are." This isn't selfish. This is survival. This is learning, finally, that you're worthy of the kindness you've been giving everyone else. Part 11. The transformation. What does it look like when someone heals from toxic kindness? They become selectively kind. They help when it aligns with their values and capacity, not out of compulsion or fear. They have boundaries. They can say no without guilt. They can disappoint people without falling apart. They know themselves. They have preferences, opinions, needs, and they're not afraid to express them. They build reciprocal relationships. They're drawn to people who give as much as they take, who see them as equals rather than service providers. They're less helpful, but more genuine. They might do fewer favors, but the ones they do are authentic rather than resentful. And here's what's beautiful. Their kindness becomes real. When it's no longer driven by fear, when it's no longer a performance, when it's no longer transactional, it transforms into something pure. They help because they genuinely want to, not because they have to. They give from overflow, not from depletion. They love others while also loving themselves. That's what true kindness looks like. Not self-sacrifice, not martyrdom, not the abandonment of self, but the extension of compassion that includes, rather than excludes, your own humanity. Conclusion. The paradox. Here's the paradox of kindness. The people who think they're the kindest are often the least kind to the one person who needs it most, themselves. They'll move mountains for strangers but won't take a day off when they're exhausted. They'll listen to others' problems for hours but won't share their own. They'll forgive everyone except themselves. And they call this virtue. But it's violence. Violence against the self. If you're someone who has lived your life being excessively kind, compulsively helpful, chronically self-sacrificing, I need you to hear this. You don't have to earn love through service. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to receive. You are allowed to exist without justifying that existence through perpetual giving. The kindest thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for others, is to stop abandoning yourself in the name of compassion. Stop saying yes when you mean no. Stop giving from an empty cup. Stop making yourself smaller so others can be bigger. Stop believing that your needs matter less than everyone else's. You matter, not because of what you do, but because you are. And learning to extend kindness to yourself, real, genuine, unconditional kindness, that's not selfish. That's revolutionary. That's healing. That's the beginning of actually living instead of just serving. Your kindness was never the problem. The world needs more genuine compassion. But it needs you whole, not broken, not resentful, not disappeared. It needs you with boundaries, with self-knowledge, with the capacity to give from fullness rather than fear. So be kind, but include yourself in that kindness. Be generous, but not to the point of self-destruction. Be helpful, but not at the cost of your own life. You deserve the same compassion you've been giving everyone else. And the moment you finally give it to yourself, that's when everything changes. That's when your kindness stops being a cage and becomes a gift. That's when you stop performing and start living. And that's when you discover what you've always deserved to know. You were always worthy. You were always enough. You never had to earn your right to exist. You just had to learn to believe it.